The lamp above the table is too bright for a room this small. It throws a hard circle of light over white muslin, steel instruments, and, set off to the side on a porcelain tray, a pair of pale, glistening glands that do not belong to a human. The air smells of carbolic, sweat, and something faintly animal, like wet hay brought indoors. Outside, a winter wind runs along the clapboard walls of the clinic, but inside it is warm, close, full. The patient is a man in his 50s, sun-browned, hat folded on a chair. He has come hundreds of miles because a voice on the radio said he didn't have to grow old yet. A nurse in a stiff cap leans over a ledger and writes in tight letters, "Caprine transplant. Vitality." The doctor speaks with the confidence of the age of miracles. You'll feel 20 years younger. No controlled trials, no endocrine assays, just a nation terrified of decline and a surgeon who learned to harvest that fear. When the cure is made of symbolism, what exactly are we implanting? And to understand how goat testicles could be sold as immortality, you have to understand the 1920s terror of growing old. The 1920s in America were loud, fast, and suddenly modern. Cars, radio, department stores, Hollywood, everything said new. But under that glitter, there was a quieter story. Men who built railroads, farms, and small-town businesses were getting old. Their bodies didn't match the tempo of the age anymore. Medicine was changing too. Endocrinology was a young, exciting field. Scientists in Europe were experimenting with animal glands, monkey, goat, ram, believing youth could be transferred like a part. Serge Voronov in France was grafting monkey tissue and calling it rejuvenation. Newspapers loved it. If a famous European said you could reverse aging, small-town America was ready to believe its own version. At the same time, regulation was patchy. In big cities, hospital boards and university clinics demanded proof, but in rural Midwest towns, on the Kansas-Oklahoma corridor in 1927, if a man rented a building, wore a white coat, and spoke well on the radio, people called him doctor. And radio, that was the accelerant. A single broadcast could reach farmers in Nebraska, shopkeepers in Missouri, widowers in Texas. A calm male voice saying, "Vitality restored, a new lease on life. Confidential consultations available." For men ashamed to talk about sexual weakness, fatigue, or aging, this was a lifeline. So the stage was set, a population afraid of decline, a new medical language about glands and hormones, and a media tool that let one charismatic man sound like an institution. Into that atmosphere walked our clinic founder, part healer, part salesman, part mirror to America's insecurity. He called it a simple operation. In his telling, goats were perfect donors, hardy, tireless, sexually vigorous. If vigor was hormonal, and hormones lived in glands, then, he said, implanting goat gonadal tissue into a human body would stimulate, awaken, and fortify the patient's own system. It was a leap of imagination, not physiology. But it sounded scientific enough. Patients arrived by train and wagon. Middle-aged farmers who said, "I tire too easily now." Traveling salesmen who whispered, "My wife thinks I don't love her." Businessmen who said, "I can't keep up." A few women, too, told they suffered from glandular depletion or change-of-life exhaustion. The clinic routine was precise. A private consultation where the doctor repeated back the patient's fear in medical language. A quote for the operation, never cheap, rarely beyond hope. A promise, you will feel 20 years younger. A nurse entering the name into the ledger, the recurring object of this story, a thick, brown book he used as proof that hundreds had trusted him. Surgery was done under local anesthetic in a room that looked half doctor's office, half farmhouse. Small incision, small pocket, animal tissue placed inside, wound closed. The real graft was not from goat to man, it was from hope to body. To make it legitimate, he advertised testimonials. I was a man again in 2 weeks. My strength returned. I could work a full day. None of these were blinded studies. None measured hormone levels. But to listeners, the very fact that someone in their position said it worked, that was proof. He even leveraged radio catalogs and printed pamphlets. Our simulated sources call them Frontier Radio Catalog, 1928, to sell the idea that modern science had finally conquered age. He wasn't the first in the world to try animal glands, but he was the first in that region to market it like a revival. Yet, medicine has a way of noticing when you replace physiology with pageantry. The ledger showed names. It did not show fevers. It did not show the man who wrote back 3 weeks later, incision hot, discharging. It did not show the farmer whose wound formed an abscess because dead goat tissue in a human body behaves like dead goat tissue in a human body. It did not show the wife who said he was so sure this would fix him. Now he is ashamed and poorer. Local physicians, especially ones trained in bigger cities, began seeing these patients when things went wrong. They asked basic questions. Was the tissue sterilized? Was there any histological compatibility? What mechanism of endocrine stimulation was proposed? And the answers, when they came at all, were vague. Some patients did report feeling better. That's important to say. Attention can heal. A charismatic doctor who says you're going to be fine can briefly lift energy, libido, even mood. Surgery itself can spark a placebo surge. And in an era when regular doctors dismissed male sexual anxiety as nervousness, this clinic listened. That too was therapeutic. But the American Medical Association, in its 1929-style warnings, our simulated American Medical Association Proceedings 1929, called it what it was: implantation of non-viable animal tissue with no proven endocrine benefit. They warned of infection. They warned of deception. They warned that patients were paying for hope, not hormones. Ethically, the cracks widened. Were patients told that goat tissue wouldn't actually fuse and function like human gonads? Were they told that even Voronoff's more sophisticated grafts were controversial? Were they told that no reputable hospital was doing this? Most were not. They were told, you will be young again. And yet, because the ledger kept growing, the doctor could hold it up as proof. If it did not work, why do they keep coming? That question drew the attention not just of doctors, but of regulators. By 1930, state medical boards were tired of chasing miracle men. Our simulated Kansas State Medical Board hearing 1930 would have read something like credential review, scope of practice challenge, concerns over radio advertising that promised cures. They wanted to know, where did he train, under whom, what recognized body endorsed animal gland implants in humans. At the same time, newspapers, some tied to urban medical centers, began calling the goat gland fad quackery. Reporters interviewed dissatisfied patients. Rival doctors testified that the animal tissue couldn't possibly survive long enough to offer the claimed rejuvenation. One line printed in a Midwest paper in 1929 could easily have said, If the tissue dies in the human body, what was the surgery for? That was the knife, because it turned the whole performance back into what it was, a symbolic operation. The surgery didn't implant function, it implanted a story, and stories, regulators argued, should not cost a man his savings or his safety. The clinic's radio persona, a confident voice promising renewed manhood, was suddenly at odds with the language of accountability, license, evidence, morbidity. He was never entirely erased. Men who believed him defended him fiercely. I felt better. He helped me when others wouldn't. City doctors are jealous. That was the power of charisma in an under-regulated landscape.
But institutional medicine had made its point. Not everything called a gland is a therapy, and not everything that sells is science. Still, that doesn't answer why so many people kept lining up. This is the part medicine often skips. We like to tell the story as villain doctor, ignorant patients, heroic regulators. But that leaves out the most human piece. Why did so many ordinary, practical Midwesterners believe a surgery with goat testicles could make them immortal? Because aging hurts identity. A farmer whose strength was his worth, a husband whose intimacy was his love language, a businessman whose energy closed deals. When that slips, shame enters. In the 1920s, there were few socially acceptable ways for men to say, "I feel old and it scares me." Most doctors didn't ask. Our clinic did. He said, "It's not your fault. It's your glands." He said, "We can fix it." He said, "Other men your age are doing it." In other words, he medicalized embarrassment. And medicine itself created the opening. Legitimate researchers were making grand claims about glands, monkey transplants, ovaries, testicular extracts. If they were fumbling toward an answer, why couldn't a small-town doctor have found it first? Return to the ledger. By now, it is heavy, worn, full of names in different hands. He shows it to visitors as proof, but read it differently, and it becomes something else entirely, a census of fear. Every line says, "I didn't want time to take me yet." That's why this story belongs in forbidden medical history, cursed treatments, not because the procedure was strange, but because it exposed a weakness in us. Offer immortality in a medical dialect, and we will pay, even if the evidence is sewn goat tissue. Which brings us to the quiet ending of the clinic. By the early 1930s, the clinic is quieter. The radio spots are rarer. The medical board has clipped his wings. Some patients still arrive. Letters still arrive. Brown envelopes from men who heard about the operation too late and write, "Can you still take me?" Inside, the operating room still smells of carbolic. The tray is still set. The ledger still waits for another name. Because the truth is bleak. So long as we fear time, there will be surgeons for our fear. Haunting 12-word rule. When medicine sells hope, the body pays for the illusion. Next time, we look at what happened when radium entered beauty culture and why glowing skin sometimes meant dying bones.